When Meghan Markle did her explosive interview with Oprah Winfrey, she left most people, if not everybody, including me, with the impression that she was accusing the royal family of being racist when talking about conversations she'd had about her unborn child and its skin colour. Harry then went on to do an interview with Tom Bradby and flat out contradicted that assumption or inference and instead blamed the British press for saying that the royal family were racist. So in this video, I'm going to look at both of those clips back to back, tell you what I think as a lawyer, because so many people just wouldn't talk about this issue, wouldn't say what they really think, but I'm going to tell you first of all, on this channel, what I think as a lawyer in what those statements mean within that interview. And secondly, you can subscribe to my Black Belt Secrets linked in the description below for what I personally felt about those interviews, because the two are subtly different. And so I've decided to keep my personal opinions separate, as most lawyers should when it comes to talking about legal issues. And on this channel, I'm going to tell you what I thought about it as a lawyer, and head over to Black Belt Secrets and you can see what I really think. But that's coming up in this video. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the channel. So let's take a look at these clips in turn, shall we? Because these clips back to back, I'll tell you out of the gate, in my view, are completely contradictory. So let's go first of all. Now, just as a caveat here, this is obviously Meghan making one statement within an interview and then Harry making another statement in another interview with somebody else. So it is not the same as taking one person's previous statement and making it as a previous inconsistent statement, but they are a couple. They clearly talked about these things together. They clearly planned these interviews together and they clearly planned everything together. I will not be convinced, although it remains my opinion as a lawyer, not a legal opinion, you understand, my opinion as a lawyer, that they would have discussed these things together. I don't think it's at all feasible that they would have made all these decisions as to what to say in these interviews completely separately. Certain things may have been spontaneous, but for the large part, I think it was planned. In fact, I even would go as far as to say that most of the questions or the lines of questions would have been pre-planned or pre-agreed beforehand. And if not, they at least expected what questions they were going to get, particularly going on the Oprah interview, because Oprah is just fantastic at asking the right question. So first of all, I'm going to play you those clips back to back, and then I'm going to rewind and take a closer look. Let's play these two clips.
So we have in tandem the conversation of he won't be given security, he's not going to be given a title, and also concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born.
What? About how dark your baby is going to be?
Potentially, and what that would mean or look like.
Ooh.
In the Oprah interview, you accuse members of your family of racism. You don't even...
No, we didn't.
Well,
the British press said that.
Right.
Did Meghan ever mention that they were racist?
She said there were troubling comments about
There was concern about his skin colour.
Right. Wouldn't you describe that as essentially racist?
I wouldn't, not having lived within that family.
Right.
Now, as a lawyer, those comments can only really mean one thing. It was said in the context of being negative. In fact, she even said as much. She said, in tandem with conversations about he's not getting security, he's not getting a title, and then this. So the third thing. So it was the third in a series of things that she was complaining about. She was certainly complaining about it. There's no real way of arguing that this wasn't an interview of complaints. It certainly was, at least in my view, because she was talking about all of the things that she wasn't happy about, all of the things that were negative, and this was the third thing in that list. So the only real inference anyone could draw from that is that she was saying that the royal family were being racist, in my view. That's the way that I interpreted it. That's the way that I think virtually everybody interpreted it. But of course, then Harry went back to almost retract and contradict that by saying, no, she didn't. She never said that, and blame the British press for it. So let's look through and see from a lawyer's perspective, because if I were analysing what someone is saying, and we have to do this on the spot, both when the witnesses are giving live evidence in court, and this is very similar to being in court. You're on the spot. You're literally in the spotlight. It's very similar to being in the witness box or on the stand, as you would say in the States. with someone asking you the questions, in this case, Oprah, in court, you'd have a barrister or an attorney asking you the questions. And it's a very, very tense place to be, with quite literally the spotlight on you. And so when you're in that position, very often witnesses, in this case, an interviewee, might choose to enhance or embellish their evidence to make it more believable. Sometimes making it worse seems to suggest that it's going to be more believable. And so people often do that. But that leads would-be witnesses into a bit of a trap when it comes to lawyers for cross-examination. Because one of the very good tactics that we use if you're in law school or bar school, take note of this one. One very good tactic to use when you're cross-examining somebody on something is to test and to press what they've said, obviously, and to put your case, and get them somehow to recount or qualify or change what they've said to let them off the hook a little bit. And you do that by building tension. So if someone has made a very dramatic statement, so let's say I was giving evidence about being attacked, and I said, they said they were going to, let's just say hurt me, so I don't flag any YouTube algorithms. They were going to hurt me. And I've said this in very strong terms. But let's say I've only said it in really strong terms to exaggerate and to enhance, to make it more believable that that's what really happened. Then if the lawyer questioning me said, is that really what they said? And they test what I say, my response, being truthful, should usually be, yes, that's what they said. And no qualifiers, no recounting and changing and somewhat wriggling out of what I've said to realize that it's actually quite bad and I better retract it just a little bit. If I'm telling the truth, there wouldn't be any of that. And the way to make that very much more prominent and much more likely, if they are enhancing their evidence, to make them retract and recount and qualify and justify and whatever, is to increase the tension. Now, it's very interesting in that this interview has worked in a very similar way to a courtroom. Because in a courtroom with a witness, what you would do if you're cross-examining and you want to test them and you want them to recount slightly in their evidence, you might ask the question, really? Is this what you are saying? You are saying that this is what they said. And so you build the tension through the question. And then when they've given you an answer, you pause. And that pause, when you're in a courtroom, or in this case, in an interview setting, that pause creates a huge tension and an expectation upon you to say something. And so that tension build up and building up the seriousness of what's been said. And I'm going to go back through in a minute and show you how this works. The build-up of the seriousness of what's been said can cause somebody to recount and to change what they've said. So if I take to this point here, you'll see the build-up of the tension that I'm talking about. And Oprah is obviously an expert at doing this in an interview setting, but it is exactly the same type of thing as what lawyers would do in a cross-examination. Watch this.
Be when he's born.
Pause for drama.
What about?
Question, what? As in, really? Is that really what they said? And spot the edit as well, by the way. I think there's been some chopped out here because having done a lot of editing now, I'm certainly no professional, but having done a lot of editing now, I can tell where there is a chop and change. The zooming in and out of my videos is very often because I edit. So if I chop and I zoom in, then maybe you don't spot the edit quite so much. That's one reason I zoom in. The other reason is user retention, but we digress. Let's just go back here. Just spot this edit here from when she asks that question.
About?
Back slightly further.
What? About how dark your baby is going to be?
See, I think there was an edit in there. But spot the pause for dramatic effect. And so with that build-up of tension upon Meghan to respond to the pause, the tension, how serious this is, a pressing question, what? To really make this stand out, Then she comes back with the qualifying language. Listen to what she says.
Potentially, and what that would mean or look like.
Potentially. Well, there either was concern or there wasn't. And she started out by saying that there was concern. Just like in my example, if I said that someone said they were going to hurt me, they either did or they didn't. So my response to if someone said, really? They said they were going to hurt you? My response to that wouldn't be, well, potentially. It wouldn't be that unless I was making it up. Now, I'm not for a moment suggesting that this conversation didn't take place at all. Clearly, some conversation took place, but the interpretation of it and how that conversation came about and what it really meant may be something completely different. And for my personal views on that, I will be recording a second video. Hopefully I'll get them live at the same time so you can watch one after the other. I will link it in the description below over on Black Belt Secrets, because I have some personal thoughts as to what really happened and what the conversation was really about. Because my son is mixed race, and so I've got some thoughts on this as well. So I can say that. As a parent of a mixed race child, I can say that. But for those views, which a lot of people seem to not want to talk about and seem to avoid talking about, I don't think there's anything wrong with having these discussions. In fact, I think it's quite healthy to have these discussions. If there are real concerns, then yes, they need to be aired. Just as, she clearly thought was necessary to do so in this interview. But I have personal thoughts about it all. And they'll be in my video on Black Belt Secrets, linked in the description below if I get it up at the same time as this one. But from a lawyer's perspective, because on this channel, what a lawyer would think, now if I'm dissecting this as if this were, it's not a cross-examination, but if this were an examination in court, she has qualified what she said by saying potentially and what that might look like. Now, the potentially element there, for me, it just suggests that she knows she's gone a little bit over the top. She's exaggerated a little bit. Or at least there's a difference in perception. So that's the first bit. But then we look at the direct contradiction here. And it is a direct contradiction in the second interview, because in the second interview, it is put to Harry by Tom Brady, is put to him directly that there were accusations of racism against the royal family. And just for the avoidance of doubt, in my view, that's the only way this first snippet in this Oprah interview, that's the only way that can really be taken. It's a criticism of someone saying that showing concerns over skin color, it can only really mean something to do with race and racism. Because, well, there wouldn't be concerns otherwise, would there, if that's the way she's put it. So I think everyone is perfectly justified if you felt that she was making accusations of racism. She didn't say it, and so there is a possibility that it wasn't. But I think everyone is justified in thinking that it was. But now let's look at Harry's interview, where it was put to him directly that that's what she meant. And he contradicts it directly and outright contradicts it, and instead blames the British press.
In the Oprah interview, you accuse members of your family of racism. You don't even...
No, we didn't. The British press said that.
Now, I've not got them to hand, but I do remember reading them. The British press would have reported on what would be a natural inference of an objective, reasonable person, the average reader, what they would interpret and infer from that interview. And as I've already said, I think everyone was perfectly justified in thinking that that is what that interview meant. It was quite literally, as she put it, in tandem with other things that she was complaining about. And they were complaints. She was complaining about those other things. And so I think you're perfectly justified in thinking that that was that level of criticism. But Harry said, no, I didn't. British press said that. Well, the press would have reported on exactly what Meghan had said in the interview, but let's listen on.
Right.
And straight away, right. A very British way of saying, I don't believe you. For those in the States, this is a very British thing. If someone just, and you'll notice the head back as well, as he says this. Watch this.
Right.
The head back and sort of nod with the frown. So tension, head back, and in a very British way. I don't know if you understand this or you do this in the States. We certainly do it here. When someone said something that you find clearly ridiculous, we just, as British, we just go, right. As in, that's nonsense. I don't believe you. It's like, right. Yeah, nonsense. Don't believe you. Let's watch it.
Did Meghan ever mention that they're racist?
Harry interrupts. So he's very keen to get his point across, but he's also very tense, very nervous. He obviously expects the question. He's probably rehearsed the question. And even then, counterintuitively, when you rehearse something, it can come out very much stiffer than it would if it was just natural. If it was a natural interview, you didn't expect the questions. It might have just been, pause for thought, looking up from memory recall. No, I don't recall that. No, I don't think that's what happened. And it would be much more natural. This was definitely a rehearsed, in my view, response. Very tense, very direct, getting ahead.
She said there were troubling comments about
there was concern about his skin color.
Right.
And then jumping in again. So she said there were troubling comments. And again, being extremely British about it. Troubling comments. Concerning was the word she used. But even then, being slightly more polite about it, I think she said there were troubling comments about. And then Harry interrupts again. Yes, there was concern about his skin color.
Right. Wouldn't you describe that as essentially racist?
I wouldn't, not having lived within that family.
So Tom says, wouldn't you describe that as being racist? And Harry says, I wouldn't, not having lived within that family. Well, if that's the case, then why was it brought up in the Oprah interview in tandem with other things that were being complained of? Then surely it wouldn't be something to be complained of. If, as Harry put it, I wouldn't, not having lived within that family. Now, at least in that sense, I agree. Because in that sense, I don't think the royal family is racist. I've seen photographs of the Queen ecstatically happy, welcoming and doing her level best to welcome Meghan into the family and everybody else. That's the impression that the British public got, and maybe you did in the States. Let me know. I'll be very interested for those watching in the States and watching this unfold in the British press, as well as over there now, as to what the reaction was by the royal family and to the royal family about this whole thing. My impression was certainly that the royal family were very supportive, and the Queen, a huge amount of respect for the Queen, always knew how to deal with the situation. And I think a lot of people, whether they're royalists or not, would have an equal level amount of respect for the Queen in how she would have dealt with that. And so, at least in that sense, I agree with what Harry said. Not having lived within the family, I haven't lived within the royal family, and even I can tell that it wouldn't have been seen as a racist thing. But in that case, why was it brought up as a complaint? This is what I would be putting as a lawyer. If I were questioning each of those about this interview and about those comments, I would be saying, why was that brought up? Well, I wouldn't be saying in cross-examination like this, because we wouldn't use an open question in cross-examination. In the States, I think you do very much more than we do here. And here, only if with a lot of practice, certain times can call for an open question, but most often it is a closed question, which would be putting your case. It would be, if you didn't consider that to be racism within your family, it would not therefore have been put across in the interview, would it? Therefore, in the Oprah interview, you were putting it across. I mean, they were putting it across as a couple. No one will ever convince me that they didn't discuss these things. I firmly believe that they would have discussed both the Oprah interview and this interview and comments said within it. I think they would have discussed those things. And having discussed them, I think they would know what they were going to say. And they would have been broadly on the same page in making the same complaints. So if that were really not a concern, it would not have been brought up in the Oprah interview. it was brought up in the Oprah interview, and therefore you did think it was a concern. Therefore, what you've said is not true. You are now changing the narrative because probably it's been perceived badly by the press and by the public at large, and therefore it's a different spin. It's almost trying to put a different spin on the original interview. That's my interpretation, because the two cannot be true. If Harry firmly believed that that was not a problem within the family, and yet Meghan was clearly putting it across as being a problem, there are only two possibilities. One is they are at odds with each other, and this is Harry saying, I didn't think so. It's, that's what she thought. I don't think that's the case, because I think they are going to be on the same page with each other. I think they are going to try and support each other. At the very least, I think Harry's going to be supportive of Meghan and what she thinks. Otherwise, it's correcting the narrative, saying, actually, no, we didn't say that. That's not what we meant. But from the contradictory nature of what he said versus what she said, and she said it in a negative context, it's absolutely clear that she meant it in a negative context, and Harry is trying to undo the damage. So I know it's been a while since this interview's been out, and I had avoided doing this, but you guys watch these videos. You seem to be interested in what my take was on these interviews and how I would think. As a lawyer, that's how I would analyze the language on what they said. It's a direct contradiction. I know it's not a direct previous inconsistent statement of Harry, because it wasn't him that said it. It was Meghan that said it. But they are contradictory statements, and the two cannot be true. And they mean one of two things. Either they're not on the same page with each other, or they're trying to correct the narrative, either of which there's a discontinuity there. So those are my thoughts. But if you want my personal thoughts on this issue and what I really think about this issue in general, which I think is perfectly fine to talk about, I think it's perfectly fine to air these thoughts and talk about these things. Otherwise, it is a concern. If we can't talk about these things, then it is a concern. But a lot of people do avoid talking about these things. But as I say, as a father of a mixed-race child, I'm perfectly entitled to talk about it and what I thought about it. And I'll tell you whether I had whether we had those conversations, all of which you can hear about on my Black Belt Secrets channel. Please subscribe there as well. I will link the video down below. Go ahead and watch that afterwards if I've got it up in time. And in the meantime, if you do enjoy these videos, please do smash that like button and subscribe. I thank you all for watching. I really appreciate your time spent here with me today, and I will see you next time.